Hello, hello. Welcome to my React segment, series, thing that I decided to periodically do. As you can see from the title, we are going to react to a content creator I actually am familiar with for once. I mean, even though I said I like overly sarcastic productions, I don't really actually watch their stuff that often. Because, I mean, I do have one that's coming down the pipeline, but that's going to be so fucking long. Hint, it's probably about the same thing you thinking it's about. So, it's going to display. Here's the one. History of the Marvel Universe by Comics Explained. This guy is so good. I like explaining comic book lore. I wanted to start with like a Fantastic Four one, but I couldn't really find one like on his channel that was like recent. And I know not many people are that into the Marvel Universe anymore. But look, I'm hype after seeing Thunderbolts twice, so you need to see it. Get hype with me. And as always, I will have this video linked in the description so you can all give him some love, even though he's got 2.5 million subscribers. At least you tell me that, there's like absolutely no dubs. I mean, no, you know, bum recommendations. At least you guys know I actually have taste. Comment down below if you think I have taste. Anyway, let's get on to it. Now, I just realized I probably should speak a little bit softer than usual because my mom's trying to sleep. She needs to. I'm like in my parents' place. I'm looking after the place for like about 4 days. So I just realized I probably should shut the hell up. Because she needs to go to sleep. Anyway. Yes, I use paint to, to my thumbnails. Don't judge me, okay? Photoshop is intimidating, and also it's subscription based, so I don't like that. Anyway. It's good for my needs. Anyway, let's watch this. Also, I swear I've watched this before, but apparently my watch history kind of like deleted itself, weirdly enough. So I don't know what the fuck's going on there, but anyway. Sit back, relax, let's watch this together.
What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and it's been a while since we made an explanation style video. And because we're coming up on the Fantastic Four, and we have a whole idea of like the multiverse going into, was it Avengers Doomsday and Avengers Secret Wars, I thought doing a video kind of explaining the history of the multiverse wouldn't be the worst idea. On the surface, the multiverse seems complicated. It's actually not. And if you know what you're talking about, you can do it in about 30.
He's lying. It kinda is. I mean, see if you can understand Multiverse of Madness. I mean, the one thing I remember about that movie is that, spoilers, Scarlet Witch dies. And it looks like they're going to retcon that as well because apparently there's a Scarlet Witch movie thing in the pipeline. I'm just like, no! She deserves to stay dead because she's a psychopath. Anyway.
30 minutes. Right, so the first thing that I want to establish here when it comes to the multiverse in Marvel Comics is that traditionally, up until Al Ewing's run on Defenders Beyond and in his Ultimates run, we didn't really have a true history of the multiverse.
Also, side fact: the only, well, actually, two now. The only, no, three. I have read World War Hulk, that series, and my first comic book was Fantastic Four against a foe they called the Iconoclast. I need to find out which one that is. And the other one I've read is, well, I'm currently reading now, is a manga, pretty sure that counts, of Deadpool when he comes to Japan. Kind of enjoying that. Oh yeah, and I got four. I've got another Deadpool one that oh, I've forgotten what happens in it. Shenanigans happen.
Did to a degree, but not really, right? In like Astonishing X-Men Volume 3, issue number 61, for example, Sage is explaining the nature of the exterminators in Marvel Comics. It was a whole extermination event and that kind of thing. But the bigger point is that she talked about the nature of the Celestials, in that initially there was only just the main Marvel Universe. And then the Celestials, essentially dealing with this threat that they couldn't control, ultimately created the multiverse and then banished this threat to an alternate reality. At the same time, if we look at Fantastic Four issue number 161, which is really when the multiverse was first actually introduced in Marvel Comics, that 3-issue story arc running into 164 kind of explains the whole idea of alternate realities. And of course, that's built on with Marvel What If, where Marvel starts exploring the idea of alternate realities. And the only real explanation there, if you want to call it that, is that all you have is the main Marvel universe, and every alternate reality is basically a branch off of that main Marvel universe.
Yeah, you see, this is really, really fascinating to me because the part that I understand is there's like branches of a tree, all right? Like the so-called prime universe, what we're actually living in now, is the center, and that all possibilities spread out from the center out into, like, the multiverse. Thing is, it goes bigger. Certain universes are grouped into omniversal chains that are like contain like the the possibility pathway of, like, every single possibility that can be happened in that universe as like a massive string, and that other multiversal strings are like so-called alternate universes, but really they're like possibility groupings based around a prime center main through line universe where everything that's meant to be happen actually happens. So, as far as I understand it, that technically means that I forgot to turn that off. The hell? Go on to do not disturb, you fucker. Anyway, that means that every single multiversal chain, omniverse, whatever you want to call it, actually exists in the Marvel Comics universe. Because, well, I actually found out through this guy. There is a so-called art universe inside of Marvel Comics, and some stories like actually happen there. Like, the one I first saw is that apparently a version of Spider-Man gets transported to our universe, and he meets an entity called the One Above All, who's supposed to be the. I mean, he probably talks about it in later on, but like he's supposed to be like basically God, but also not. It's interesting. Anyway, I'll let him explain.
You guys are pretty much familiar with that because of like Marvel's What If. You know, it's like, what if Bruce Banner never became the Hulk? What if Spider-Man never lost the Enigma Force from the Acts of Vengeance storyline, for example?
Yes, I know it well.
Example, when he was Captain Universe. What
Captain Universe. Wow.
If, you know, Steve Rogers was never.
I also love how derpy Iron Man looks in his like earliest stories. Look at this fucker. Look at this guy. He looks like he's strapped up in like an old-fashioned like diving suit.
Never thought out, right? And just stayed frozen in ice for however long. And for the most part, that worked in Marvel, right? It wasn't really a massive issue. And as the fan base, we kind of went with it. But then you come into the Ultimate Universe, introduced originally in the year 2000 with Earth 1610.
Yes. Yeah, the Ultimate Universe where they tried to make everything edgier. It's kind of weird how that, you know, universally happened at the same time. Yes, let's make everything edgy because of the Matrix and, well, actually X-Men with their totally not comic book accurate, but very leather and very 90s spandex outfits. I mean, I wasn't pissed off when I first saw them because, you know, this was, you know, X-Men was the X-Men movies were the first time I actually saw the X-Men. I was like, holy shit, these guys are so cool. Now, with the benefit of hindsight, why the fuck didn't they put him in, you know, put Wolverine in his base fucking costume until, actually, I've got the movie where they first fucking put it in his actual colors. Finally, that's Deadpool v Wolverine. Why did it take so fucking long, Marvel? Fuck. I mean, I know why it took so long. It's because you sold the fucking rights to Fox, and then you bought Fox, so I guess you have the final laugh. Oh wait, no. Hang on. Shit. Marvel sold off the rights. Well, actually, its main characters before that, like the Avengers and, like, you know, kind of. But they sold off the X-Men to Fox in, like, 1995? I think? Or 1994? One of those? And they sold off I think they sold off Spider-Man earlier. It's just that no one actually could, like, get it. I can't remember the exact time when they sold it off to Sony, but yeah. Yeah, I can't remember. Anyway, this is how I work. Oh, yes. I end up talking about this, and then I get sidetracked into this, and this, and this, and this, and this. It's like a spider's web.
There was no branch universe effect there. It's not as though the Ultimate Universe picked up with like, well, what if Peter Parker had gotten, you know, become Spider-Man at a different point in time or something like that? Instead, it just kind of went off to the races. And so this really...
I'm sorry, I just saw that the spider's googly eyes. It looks like... Look, it looks so derp.
Like that. Instead, it just kind of went off to the races. And so this really left a huge question, which is if this universe exists, but it's not based on
Oh my god. Fucking. I have no defense against this character, but they kinda did ruin him in in the TV show. You have to do better, Senator. What, against fucking terrorists? They blow up literal buildings and you like want to anyway.
The main Marvel universe, then how in the world do you tie it into the multiverse? And we started seeing more and more questions like that pop up as different alternate realities were introduced in Marvel that seemingly had nothing to do with the main Marvel universe. And so all this came to a head in Al Ewing's Ultimates. And Al Ewing's kind of the cosmic guy in Marvel, which is to say, like, whenever there's stories out there that deal with the multiverse, the history of the multiverse, all kinds of different powerful beings that are out there, Al Ewing's usually the dude who handles it. And so most of you guys are familiar with the story of the first firmament, but for those of you guys who are not, what Al Ewing did is he came back and he basically said there are a finite number of universes that exist in the multiverse that are never changing, right? Call them multiversal constants if you want to. Everything else is just a branch off the main Marvel universe. And this came from the first firmament. So the idea behind this was that the first firmament simply came into existence. We can largely presume it was created by the one above all, but Al Ewing never really explains that.
Ah, yes. Of course, he's going to mention it, but you know.
What ends up happening is the first firmament creates life on its own. And for those of you guys who remember like the Ultraverse in Marvel, yes, it's very similar to the character of Nemesis. But the first firmament in creating life saw itself as a kind of absolute authority, meaning that it believed it was the alpha and omega, the beginning and the end. It should live forever. And so in creating these beings, it called them aspirants. And the aspirants were very dedicated to the first firmament. And so what they would do is they would create life.
They should have aborted that life. Whatever the fuck that is.
Right, planets and stars, solar systems, galaxies, the
That looks like a living thumb. I
whole
don't
nine
like
yards.
that.
They literally filled in the first cosmos, which is the other name that the first firmament has. And that those creations that were deemed, I guess, unsatisfactory by the first firmament were destroyed by the aspirants and they would start over again. But there were some aspirants who believed that the very universe itself, right, the first firmament and every form of life within it should understand growth, change, and mortality, that it should die and then be reborn as something new. And so these aspirants changed their physical appearance and started calling themselves the Celestials. And so what followed was a
Is that where the Celestials came from? Oh, so they're basically like the Reapers from Mass Effect. I mean, they're like less poetically named, or obviously named, but yeah. Huh. Okay.
effectively a holy war between the aspirants and the celestials, but it was a holy war fought on cosmic proportions. So where you and I, right, human beings wage war with, bombs and guns and
Uh-huh.
tanks and so on and so forth. These guys were waging war on a universal scale. Entire planets were their weapons. Now, we never really got to see the ins and outs of the battle itself. It would have been cool if we had. But what matters is that towards the end of the war, the Celestials ultimately won by firing off a weapon into the first universe that shattered it into a multitude of pieces. Now, it is important to note that within the story itself, specifically, this is all happening in Ultimates 2, issue number 6 by Al Ewing, that the first firmament, as it's kind of recounting its history, says that it was shattered into hundreds of pieces, each of which spiraled out into a new universe. So it's not an infinite multiverse, at least not yet. And again, we'll cross that bridge here in a minute. What I do want to specify going forward is that technically the first multiverse is referred to as the second cosmos in Marvel, but I feel like if we start going back and forth, right, it's the second cosmos or the first multiverse, it'll kind of make things a little convoluted. So we're going to kind of get rid of the idea of like
Yeah.
second cosmos, third cosmos, so on and so forth. and just call them like first multiverse, second multiverse, third multiverse. I feel like it'll be a lot easier to follow that way. And so what ended up happening is that with the first multiverse coming into existence, the Celestials did two things. The first is that they duplicated themselves and put a version of themselves in each one of these universes that made up the new multiverse. That's why there's different versions of the Celestials across every universe of the multiverse. Now, they're not all the same. This is one of the things that was established in Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four, for example, that in an alternate reality, you had the Mad Celestials, who were guys like Erishan the Judge, the ones that we know, but they had basically become drunk with their own power, and they had forced everybody in that universe to worship them as gods, presumably after destroying Galactus. We never actually saw that happen in their native universe. But the fact is, they ended up showing up in the main Marvel universe, wanting to spread across the multiverse and seize control of everything. They were ultimately unsuccessful because of Franklin Richards. But the second thing the Celestials did is they created the Beyonders. Now, this was a change from Al Ewing, which is to say, from Secret Wars 1984 running all the way up until Secret Wars 2015 by Jonathan Hickman, we didn't really know a whole lot about the Beyonders outside of the fact that they existed in what was called the Beyondverse, this place outside of all space and time, and is the source of power for cosmic cubes in Marvel Comics. But in Secret Wars 2015, we got a little more meat and potatoes, where we learned the only real involvement that the Beyonders had in any significant, meaningful way across the entire multiverse was the desire to destroy it. Now, there is a whole motivation behind that, but I feel like if we go into that right now, it'll derail things, so we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But when Al Ewing came along and made this change, it's one of these things that split fans of Marvel Cosmic. Either they loved it or they hated it, and there are some that just still don't like it. But the bigger point is that the Beyonders were created by the Celestials because the Celestials realized what would happen if there were a war that broke out on the same level as it did during the first Firmament's time, right? The Celestials going to war against one another, except now it wouldn't just be a war in any particular universe. It could potentially be a war on a multiversal level. And so the Celestials gave the Beyonders enough power that the Beyonders themselves could actually destroy the Celestials if they needed to. And so following this, the first multiverse honestly didn't last very long. And it wasn't due to any...
Okay, so the Celestials were created as a check against, stagnation and stagnation and unchangingness. And so, but as a result, if they actually grew too large for their bounds, they could wage, in order to control the failsafe, to not let them grow beyond their bounds, there's another failsafe called the Beyonders who live outside of time and space, all time and space, to bring them into check if they should change too much. Am I thinking of that right?
Kind of war or conflict or anything like that. It was more due to the fact that it was relatively new and just kind of wanted to experience what it would be like to end itself. And so it did, right? And then in turn, it became the second version of the multiverse. Now, this is where Al Ewing basically set in motion the idea that when multiverses are destroyed and then basically come back into existence, that there's not really a reboot. It's not a fresh start or anything like that. In fact, what happens is everything from the previous version of the multiverse is carried over into the next one. So it basically adds to itself over and over and over again. And so in the second version of the multiverse, the idea of good and evil was introduced, specifically the Lifebringer and the Anti-All. The idea being that they represent...
Okay, so okay, this reminds me of the several different initiations of the Matrix in the Matrix movies. In the second Matrix movie, how the architect mentioned they had to keep initiating on the Matrix to keep people in line. So it sounds like the multiverse has a space-time memory that could initiate on itself without the interference of a creator. Okay. I'm already getting a little bit lost. Hang on.
The eternal struggle between good and evil, right? Existence and non-existence. And of course, basically the Lifebringer won. But
oh, it. I just realized this is literally in our universe as well. It happened in our universe at the very beginning. Matter and antimatter. There was a slight imbalance, therefore matter won. This is essentially what this is. It's order versus chaos. It's that kind of. Okay. Okay, I kind of get it now.
What ended up happening is the anti-all effectively shattered and then spread itself across the multiverse. And what this meant is it kind of introduced the notion that when a multiverse or a universe dies, in between its death and its rebirth is the great nothingness, right? The yawning void. You hear different names for it in Marvel Comics, but basically the place that represents like where Null, the symbiote god, comes from. No, it's not the same thing as Oblivion. And again, we'll cross that bridge here in a little while.
Null the symbiote god, as in Venom symbiote? I feel like I need more backstory into that. Like I am so sorry that went in the wrong way. Like and subscribe if you want me to react to that. I am so sorry. I like leaned into the microphone and everything. Jesus. Anyway, let's go on.
But following this, you go into the third version of the multiverse. That introduces archetypes. So good guys stand for this, bad guys stand for that. You go into the fourth version of the multiverse, that introduces the idea of magic. And again, it kind of continues on until you get to the sixth version of the multiverse. And that was a multiverse that was based entirely in science. Yes, there were elements of magic that it carried on, and in a lot of ways, the way that Al Ewing presented the sixth version of the multiverse to us, it was almost like this blend between science and magic. But this is where Galactus.
I mean, a great man once said that science is just understandable magic. Well, I'm paraphrasing, but yeah, you get it.
Comes from, right? The Space Explorer Gallon. Now, there are other stories that dealt with the sixth version of the multiverse in Marvel Comics outside of what Al Ewing had done during his Ultimates and Defenders Beyond runs, and that even predate his runs. A really good example of this is Adventures of the X-Men, which was kind of a side-along story to the origin of Galactus. And those of you guys who are familiar with my channel, you already know how this goes, so just bear with me here for a second. But a lot of you guys probably know the origin of Galactus, if for no other reason than just kind of poking around and doing your own research. But he basically came from a universe within the sixth multiverse. He didn't know why his universe was dying, and basically at the end of his universe, he ended up merging with the sentience, quote unquote, of the universe, and then was reborn into the next universe as Galactus. What Adventures of the X-Men did.
I don't know why I always thought Galactus was always a rogue celestial. As in those deities shown in the beginning. I don't know. Yeah. Apparently, he's basically Superman if Superman fled from a dying universe instead of a planet.
And kind of coupling all this information with what
and also he eats planets like they were cookies.
Al Ewing did is it introduced this idea that what was actually happening was the Dweller in Darkness had basically fractured the M'Kraan crystal. And the example that I always like to use is the M'Kraan crystal is effectively a hallway of doors, right? Like each door leads to a different universe. And there's a lot of artifacts like that in places like that in Marvel, right, where you can access the multiverse through different ways. But the fracturing of the Mcron crystal couldn't be halted. And like a black hole, it was sucking in the multiverse. When Galen merged with the sentience of his universe, it wasn't actually the sentience of the universe he was merging with. It was the sentience of the sixth multiverse that he was merging with. And that's why when that version of the multiverse condensed down and then basically exploded with a big bang, creating a new multiverse, there's a version of Galactus in every universe that exists out there. Now, again, this is largely
Yeah,
conjecture.
because he
There
was.
isn't really
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah, because. Okay. The reason there's a version of Galactus in every universe is because he was the center of. He had the center of a multiverse inside him, so. Since he was the. Well, not the nucleus, the singularity of everything there. Since it was the origin point, then literally he basically propagated himself across the multiverse because he was the origin point.
Per se in Marvel Comics that officially establishes this. But we can just kind of put the pieces together, right, using our own lines of logic and whatnot to draw a pretty reasonable conclusion. And so, where this now takes us into the seventh version of the multiverse, while that does basically encompass everything that you've ever read in Marvel Comics leading up to Secret Wars 2015, I want to stave off the conversation about Secret Wars 2015 for a second, and I want to talk about the nature of the multiverse and cosmic entities. Now, in Al Ewing's Ultimates, issue number 5, he answered a question that a lot of us had running up to that point in time. Because while the first run kind of answered a lot of these questions and introduced a lot of things, it was the question of if this is effectively the new history of the multiverse, and there's not really any mention of cosmic entities in the traditional sense. So, eternity, infinity, different things like that. Had they ever existed in the multiverse leading up to its seventh version? And the answer is yes. In that comic, he specified that every single universe from the creation of the first multiverse going forward manifests itself as the cosmic entity eternity. Now, eternity represents time, and his sister, for lack of a better word, infinity, represents space. So between the two of them, they of course represent time and space.
Yeah, that makes sense. Infinity, infinite space, space, eternity, infinite time. Time, okay.
Now, we weren't really given specifics outside of that, but we can largely conclude that much like the main Marvel universe that existed in the seventh version of the multiverse, that Eternity spawned a whole bunch of child cosmic entities. And so we're talking about guys like Eon, Eulogy, Empathy, Expediency. What can I say, man? Eternity has a thing for kids whose names start with an E. But still, right? We don't definitively know that, but we can just kind of draw that conclusion. And so, with that out of the way, what I also want to do here is I want to take a second and kind of wrap back to our discussion about the nature of universes within the multiverse. So, again, most multiversal stories, like 99% of them in Marvel Comics, specifically outside of Al Ewing's run and whatever you happen to see in Dan Slott's Spider-Verse, as well as Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, and whatever other
What the absolute fuck is this? Dinosaur versions of the Avengers.
miscellaneous stories out there deal with the multiverse, most of them deal with the idea of an alternate reality that branches off the main Marvel universe. That's the entirety of What If, right? So again, what if Spider-Man never lost the Enigma Force right, during the events of Acts of Vengeance, when Loki pit the villains against the superheroes. And so taking the work that Al Ewing had done in Ultimates and Defenders Beyond and kind of bringing it again back into this conversation, the very notion of the fact that the first firmament shattered into hundreds of universes would indicate there are constant universes out there, which is to say, when the multiverse dies, that the multiverse is reborn, and these hundreds of universes always come with it. Now, we don't know what all those hundreds of universes are, and outside of a story where the context just shows that it doesn't branch off the main Marvel universe, we don't necessarily know if that's the case or not. But that's where I want to come into the idea of the Ultimate Universe, because the Ultimate Universe did not branch off the main Marvel universe. There was no way for it to have branched off the main Marvel universe, and if it did,
Yeah, it was. What I vaguely remember, it was just its own thing. It was just I don't want to say it was an attempt for Marvel to become like more quote unquote realistic, but I think it was like supposed to be a alternative for people who didn't like the unbelievability of like the main comics universe and just said, "Hey, if you're not interested in that kind of thing, here's a more believable universe that's more edgy and brown."
there had to have been some catalyst for it. Again, we're talking about Earth 1610 in Marvel. The original Ultimate Universe launched in the year 2000. I'll explain why that matters here in a little bit. The important thing is that this effectively established that the Ultimate Universe is one of several universes out there that just manifests on its own. It will always exist. It always comes into existence in some capacity. It can be destroyed, and we saw it destroyed, and the maker's currently trying to recreate it in Marvel. But the fact is, right, that's how you reconcile these various universes that exist out there that have nothing to do with the main Marvel universe, yet somehow exist, right? It's the best explanation that we get. And so, following that, I want to go into the higher level cosmic entities. Now, these are higher beings like the Living Tribunal, guys like Oblivion, the Phoenix Force. The Living Tribunal and the Phoenix Force are specifically interesting here, and we can largely draw conclusions with Oblivion. We'll talk about why here in a second. But with the Living Tribunal and the Phoenix Force, we don't really have a genesis point, which is to say, we don't know when they originated, like where they actually started. They just came into existence at some point.
Side note: the Phoenix Force, at least, is basically what's been tried to tell in like the movies at least 3 times, and they've all failed. Wait, is it 3 times or 2 times? I think it's twice. Yeah, it's twice.
What also complicates things for its character is that in Strange Tales issue number 158, when the Tribunal was first introduced and encountered Doctor Strange, it specified that it existed to ensure multiversal balance, that no universe became more powerful than the others, and that the mystical energy that imbued the multiverse, so effectively magic, that it wasn't abused, misused, different things like that. But over the years, the role of the Living Tribunal has really fluctuated to the point that it doesn't really seem to have a purpose anymore. And the reason why I say that is because, again, in Al Ewing's work, he introduced the multiversal eternity, which is to say, if the multiverse could get up, walk around, and talk to you, it would be the multiversal eternity. And so, if that exists, what's
Also, side note: I really love its fucking design. Look at that.
the purpose of the Living Tribunal? And even to this day, there are fan debates all the time about who's more powerful, right? The Living Tribunal or the multiversal eternity. The Living Tribunal exists as an aspect of the multiverse, so does it fall under the multiversal eternity? We haven't really seen multi eternity for a while, at least not that I'm aware of. And so we don't even know if it exists anymore. I have heard tell that the Incredible Hulk comics at the moment are dealing with a lot of that stuff, but I'm not really current on the Hulk. I need to get current. So again, this information is based on what I know so far. But the fact is that beyond the Living Tribunal, you go into the Phoenix. Now, the Phoenix Force represents the sum total of all life.
Epic fail. I've not heard those words in a long time.
life that has ever, currently does, or will ever exist across the multiverse. It is immensely powerful. And in fact, within Al Ewing's Marvel cosmic hierarchy, his multiversal hierarchy, the Phoenix Force is actually beyond the Beyonders themselves. We did make a video that basically runs over the cosmic hierarchy of cosmic beings in Marvel Comics, so I'll post a link to that down in the description. Alex, please actually do it this time. Like, apparently, you guys have been complaining that Alex doesn't do it. I don't know. Alex, you're getting yelled at by me and the fans. But again, right? The Phoenix Force, it does have its own history. If you guys are interested, we can go into that. We can make a video about the history of the Phoenix. It's pretty chunky, right? So it's more than we can simply do in this video, if for no other reason than the sake of brevity. But beyond the multiversal cosmic entities, right? Because there are a few others, Hawk God and different things like that. Beyond the multiversal cosmic
Hawk God.
entities, you also have multiversal organizations. Now, not all these organizations continue to exist.
Okay, I only know of one of these, and that's the Council of Reeds. That's only because Rick and Morty had like a side story basically referencing them, and I found out later.
Some of them are defunct, but there are two major multiversal organizations that have existed over the years in Marvel Comics that really had more.
Oh yeah, and yeah, the other one is the Illuminati, technically. Sometimes.
More of a hand in the progression of the multiverse than anybody else. The first is the Omniversal Development Court, and the second is the Captain Britain Court. Now, the Omniversal Development Court was initially led by a woman named Saturnine, or Saturnine, depending on how you want to pronounce it. She was the Magistrix, and the entire idea behind the Omniversal Development Court is that it would monitor every universe. And across the multiverse, around the same time, every universe should start to develop superheroes. So mutants should start to come into existence. Some version of the Avengers will form, some version of the Fantastic Four, so on and so forth. If that doesn't happen, then the Omniversal Development Court will go into that universe and initiate something called the Push.
Okay, I have a very good insight into something like this because I used to watch a martial arts movie when I was young. It used to be one of my favorites. It's called The One. Stars Jet Li. I think I saw it. It's like free on YouTube. I need to watch it again because I haven't watched it in forever. But apparently, like, for what I remember, it's basically this, except yeah, there's like a massive extra universal government that monitors things, and it apparently sends out a he was like in prison or something, or they had to send out someone to actually run up because they find out that someone has been killing the alternates of their own universe, their own alternates, and thus gaining more power, and thus they actually, I think, no, they actually recruit like one of his alternates because apparently, it works both ways, so that, he's like consumed all the ones that, that were in that, collective sphere, and now they have to verse each other or something. I know, it just reminds me of that.
Basically, jumpstart the evolution of that universe and get it caught up with all the others. Now, the most notable instance of this happening, and the only real meaningful appearance of the Omniversal Development Court, was the Crooked World storyline, the Mad Jim Jasper story. Most all of you guys have heard of his character. He was basically a guy who had wiped out all the superheroes on his Earth, which was Universe 238. The Omniversal Development Court didn't know this, so when they went into his universe and initiated the push, it pissed off Jim Jaspers. He sparked the Jaspers warp, which literally started twisting the entirety of the universe in like a reality distortion tornado. And it would have infected the entirety of the multiverse had the development court not obliterated the entirety of the Earth 238 universe. Now, that goes into the 616 version of Jaspers, and again, we don't necessarily have to go into that. But the second thing here is the Captain Britain Corps. Now, the Captain Britain Corps is particularly interesting. It's actually really fascinating. Those of you guys who are familiar with the Green Lantern Corps from DC Comics, imagine that it's basically like the Lantern Corps, where they have basically lanterns that monitor different sections of space, sectors as they're called in DC. But instead of them being sectors of space, they're entire universes. And so you have a Captain Britain in each and every universe. You don't see their stories all the time, and you don't necessarily see them interacting on a multiversal level all the time. But when you do, it's pretty cool. A really good example of this is during the collapse of the multiverse in Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers. And the
Okay, why does the name Captain Braddock ring a bell? Hang on. Sorry, this is gonna. Oh, he's just the mainline Captain Britain. Oh, okay. Brian was empowered by the legendary Egyptian Merlin and his daughter Ruma and assigned to be the champion of the British Isles. Oh, okay. Okay. I don't know why I know that guy's name.
idea that basically incursions were taking place and entire universes were being wiped out as a result of those Earths crashing into each other. During the events of Spider-Verse, Spider-Man UK, right, the Captain Britain of his universe, once Spider-Verse was done, was supposed to go back to his reality. But when he did, or at least when
Spider-Man UK. I'm sorry, but if the current mainline Spider-Man sound has a Queen's accent, what accent does Spider-Man UK have? Because there are so many regional accents in like the UK. How does that even work?
the doorway was opened for him to enter, there was just a black void because his universe had been destroyed by the incursions. He just didn't know it. It was really, really fascinating, right? The Captain Britain Corps themselves actually dealt with the incursions as well. And we'll talk about what that means here in a minute. But the general gist of
I'm sorry.
dealt with the incursions as well.
Okay, a blonde Spider-Man with mutton chops with like massive sideburns. That feels very wrong to me. Like ultra super wrong.
And we'll talk about what that means here in a minute. But the general gist of the Captain Britain Corps is that they are basically led by Saturnine, which is to say, like, they're almost kind of like an army. They were at one point the long arm of the law, for lack of a better word, for the Omniversal Development Court. Once Saturnine was kicked out and the court was effectively disbanded, that Saturnine just kind of became the leader of the Captain Britain Corps in and of itself. And she would assemble the entire corps in times of multiversal crisis. Outside of that, the corpsmen would just kind of go out, they would do their thing, they would report back to her if there was anything they needed to tell her in particular, and that was effectively it. But that takes us into Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers. There are some elements of the multiverse that we are leaving out here. And so if there is anything that I have not covered here that you're interested in, leave a comment down below and I'll get to it as best I can. Plus, I love making videos that you guys find intriguing and interesting because I know all this stuff, right? So I just love teaching you guys cool things. So as most of you guys know, right, the entirety of Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, it was all basically caused by Doctor Doom, right? That Doctor Doom had basically learned alongside the Molecule Man that the Beyonders had basically...
Yeah, this is, I mean, ostensibly, this is kind of what I hope will happen with like Avengers Secret Wars. Because I've read kinda what happens in like Secret Wars back in 2015, which is what it's based on. There's some really wild shit.
created a Molecule Man in every single reality across the multiverse. Now, again, this is all happening before Al Ewing made the huge change with the Beyonders that they were made by the Celestials and all that stuff, right? So that has not happened in Marvel Comics. So at the time that Hickman was writing a story, the Beyonders were just some villains essentially out there in the multiverse, or at least in the Beyondverse. But the reason why the Beyonders had created these versions of Molecule Men across the multiverse was because they had enough power to destroy every universe that they were in, and the goal of the Beyonders was to blow up all the Molecule Men at the same time, just to destroy the multiverse, just to see what happens. It was just this grand cosmic experiment. Such as it was, when Doctor Doom and the Molecule Man Owen Reese from the main Marvel Universe learned about this, they traveled to another reality and they stabbed and killed that version of the Molecule Man. What it did is it blew his universe up, but it basically created this kind of suction effect. I used to explain it as pushing the universe outward, but in reality, that's not the best way to describe it. What it was doing is it was contracting the multiverse. And so what it did is it sucked the universes that were next to it into the place that it used to be. But because nothing was there, because that universe was destroyed, those two universes started moving closer and smashed into each other. Their explosion had the same effect on the universes next to them. It was pulling them closer. And so slowly over time, universes were crashing into each other and they were destroying each universe. Now, the way this worked was that Earth was the incursion point. So if you destroyed Earth in one of these instances, that the universes would pass through each other.
This is like a weird thing about Marvel Comics is that there are certain places that are like guaranteed to exist in Marvel Comics, and that is Earth. Apparently, Earth is like a nexus point in like reality, in that one has to exist and has to survive. And that's why basically everything in the MCU or any Marvel universe happens on or around or involving Earth somehow.
But if both Earths touched, both universes would be destroyed. And there were different tactics that people would take across the multiverse in order to save their reality. A good example of this is that from Black Swan, as she was explaining it to the Illuminati, that Hank McCoy, Beast, in other realities, actually had the plan of evacuating Earth and then blowing the planet up in order to save the multiverse. It's considered a coward's way out, but it is a way to survive nonetheless. And so some Earths doing that actually survived the incursions initially. Then all that came to a head when Doctor Doom had essentially brought together all these Molecule Men across the multiverse in just a giant box, quite literally, and then confronted the Beyonders by opening this box up. All these Molecule Men came pouring out, and when that happened, they detonated and destroyed the Beyonders, but then also obliterated most all of what was left of the multiverse. So those universes that had managed to survive after destroying their Earths, it didn't matter. They all ended up in the same place. And so the result of this is that Doctor Doom, using the Molecule Man, took the power of the Beyonders, created Battle World, and that's where you get Secret Wars 2015. Now, the way that Secret Wars 2015 ended, we as fans all thought it was going to be a reboot. The way that Marvel wrote it, the way the story was told, it felt like it was going to be a full reboot. Literally, the story ends with the Molecule Man serving as the wellspring of power Franklin Richards, the son of Reed Richards, crafting universes using this wellspring of power, and then Reed putting them back in the multiverse where they're supposed to go. After Franklin had provided all the life energy, all the denizens and planets, stars, galaxies, solar systems, all that kind of stuff that would occupy this universe. And so we all kind of figured Marvel would just sort of go into it and say Spider-Man #1, Captain America #1, yada, yada, yada. Instead, what Marvel did is they said, actually, things are continuing on. Technically, it is the 8th version of the multiverse, but not really, because nothing meaningful changed, right? It all just kind of continued on. The only real things that changed was that with the Living Tribunal having been killed by the Beyonders during the events of Hickman's Avengers, New Avengers, that in an alternate reality, that version of Adam Warlock became the new Living Tribunal. Small little things like that. But again, all in all, it's not overly complicated, at least not for me. Hopefully it wasn't for you. I'm really hoping this wasn't one of those videos where I tried to pack so much stuff into one video that it's just obnoxiously dense. Fingers crossed that's not the case. But again, if there is anything about the multiverse that I left out that you guys are really, really interested in learning about, let me know. Because I mean, there is the history of the Phoenix Force, and there's all kinds of things that we haven't necessarily talked about here. Things like the Goblin Force and so on and so forth. The nature of the Spider-Verse itself, right? That's a really interesting aspect of the multiverse.
I was waiting for like something like the Spider-Verse to actually get into it, but you never explained
We
it.
do have videos on that though. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.
All right, that's it. Chuck this man a follow, subscribe, like it. I will have it down in the description if you want to see it yourself. But until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I've been Purist, signing off.